Hey you. Yeah, you. Come here a minute. You want to dunk on some dragon show? Yeah, you do. Alright, here we go. We open on a creepy, dank cave with some added birds for ambience. The teenager lying on the floor and the old man stuck in the big tree are completely doped out of their minds, having collective hallucinations about things that don't matter while weird nature-y beings watch on. Anyway, that's enough about this Woodstock documentary. Let's talk about the second episode of the best season of Game of Thrones. Home! Da da! Da 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 da. It's the dragon show. Bran seems confused about everything that happens, which is a sensible thing to want to write so that the audience has a stand-in fish out of water type character to ask the questions that they're asking. But it doesn't really work when that character should, within all reason, already know what's going on. Someone like Neo works in this role because all of the concepts that are new to the audience are also new to him. So when the script needs to explain something to the audience, Morpheus can just explain it to Neo without any qualms. It makes perfect sense, and this is one of the main purposes of having a fish out of water type protagonist. It doesn't work, however, when your Marty McFly has presumably been doing nothing else but going back in time with Doc for the past year. Bran has lived in the DeLorean for 12 months and he's still asking about gigawatts.
What the hell is a gigawatt?
Little Ned quotes season 5 to Benjen, as all true lovers do.
Keep your shield up, or I'll ring your head like a bell.
Once Bran recognizes his Aunt Lyanna,
My Aunt Lyanna.
how dare you interrupt me? Max von Sydow shows concern and tries to say something, but damn, that kid moves fast. Maybe I should break his legs. We learn that Hodor's name is not Hodor, and he once knew how to say things that aren't Hodor. Then, for some reason, Max von Sydow says they have to leave. Probably because the audience has all the exposition they need for now. Once they unplug from the Matrix, Bran complains that he wanted to stick around in the episode's title.
I was home.
Max's response is kinda nothing, and the explanation for showing Bran this flashback is also nothing. And the kicker is that everything that happens in this cave is very much nothing. Now, of course it's fine to contextualize your expository flashbacks as actual things that your characters experience, but what are we doing here? What purpose could this serve in what was supposed to be Bran's training? And even if Max von Sydow knows in advance that Bran will need to break Hodor in the past, in the future, to save himself, what's the point of taking Bran here now? But then, if he knows things about the future, why doesn't he do anything to prevent Bran from being marked by Rhaegar? And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I don't know, man. It just seems like the whole plot makes no sense. Okay, so Bran has spent an entire year isolated from everybody, except for a crazy old man, a cranky girl boss, some weird hippies, and Hodor. Which honestly isn't so far removed from my own recent isolation experience. Such a period of extreme circumstances presents a great opportunity for a character, obviously. Now is the time to change him. Now is the time to show us how his story has impacted him. Now is when you make him Robot Bran. Not inexplicably in the few minutes that pass between the end of Season 6 and the start of Season 7. Bear with me while I jump ahead, it's necessary for exploring the issues at hand. In the Winds of Winter, Bran is able to talk to Mira and Benjen somewhat like a human. Like, sure, he's no silver-tongued neurotypical, but he's more like Abed than he is like Hal. He thanks his uncle, he appeals to Mira's emotions, and he has personal investment in seeking certain information. All typical things a human person might do with their time, I've been told. Keep in mind that all of this happens in the haunted forest with the walrus in eyeshot, so when they get to Castle Black in the very next episode, surely at the very most only a day has passed. And yet, somehow Bran has become the three-eyed tree bot in this short window of time. So I guess we're meant to believe that learning the ultimately inconsequential true parentage of his bastard half-brother shocked him so traumatically that he instantly abandoned any semblance of personality. Yeah, no, this is dumb. Maybe instead of the character fundamentally changing over the course of no more than one day after learning one piece of insignificant trivia, it would be better if he changed over the course of a whole fucking year in which he learnt many horrific truths of the universe, a period of time that you wrote into the story and didn't use for anything. I don't know, just a suggestion. Bran has been gone from the show for over a season. This moment of reintroduction is the perfect opportunity to show the audience how he has grown, who the three-eyed raven is, and what it means for Bran to be training under him. But instead of that, they chose to use this reintroduction to establish that Hodor was once not Hodor. What a waste. You know how in the year between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Luke Skywalker undergoes a dramatic change in abilities and demeanor? No? Have you seen Star Wars? He spent ages training and taking things super seriously, and now he's a complete badass as opposed to the useless whiny shit heap he was previously. Perfect opportunity to alter a character, and they used it well. Okay, now imagine that in between those two movies, the only change Luke underwent was a haircut, and his transition to domineering badass happened with no explanation in the brief window of time between him surrendering to Vader and him meeting with the Emperor. Like, that's just fucking stupid, right? Yeah, well, that's what they did with Bran. So while the dialogue of Season 6 is typically stronger than that of Season 7 and 8, the writing still falters in major ways when it comes to everything.
You died in that cave.
Bullshit, don't believe this blatant revisionism. Then we go have a chat with Meera, who actually has developed reasonably, truly acting like someone whose brother led her into a remote frozen wasteland a year ago and then got murdered in front of her. So that makes sense of her, but it does occur to me as strange that Meera is more of a robot at this point than Bran is, considering that he's the one who's presumably spent a year literally detached from reality. But of course, the character who's changed the most here is Leaf, which makes sense, she's really been through a lot. Anyway, that's that one scene. Next up is the bro down at Castle Black.
Open the door and the men inside can rejoin their brothers in peace,
He said, lyingly. Unfortunately, there is no epic fanboy moment where Davos scrambles to keep up in a fight with the clearly more skilled Sir Alliser, but such a fight would be necessarily dumb given the amount of arrows pointed at the door. Luckily, what does happen isn't dumb at all, right? Just as the door is breached, a giant happens. Tormund kills one dude and Alice's mutineers instantly lose resolve, except for this one guy who wants to see exactly how valuable an asset 1-1 is in combat. Good setup, thanks man. I like how Tormund points out that it's Alliser who ultimately lost Castle Black to the wildlings. That's good. Ollie gives killing the guy a shot, which is reasonable given, you know,
Potatoes!
but he and Thorne are restrained. Then they and some other guys are imprisoned. Given that the majority of the castle was on Thorne's side and Ed didn't specify who exactly should be imprisoned, it's pretty strange that only like 4 or 5 men are detained. What's more is that all of the mutineers surrendered as soon as they were presented with a wildling force, except for Ollie, who, you know.
Potatoes!
Considering that the main motive behind Alice's treason, mutiny, and murder of Jon Snow was the presence of wildlings at and south of the Walrus, this is weird. Really weird. Like, did you not know there would be a giant? You all saw him when he passed through. Did you think that the free folk wouldn't react to their peacekeeper's murder? How long did you expect them to not know about this? What was the plan to keep Castle Black? Why would you go out of your way to rebel against the wildlings having been let through and then have no plan to deal with them having been let through? Also, Alliser could have stopped the wildlings from ever passing south in the first place, and he didn't.
Open the gates.
These aren't nitpicks, these are gaping holes in the plot, because these characters' lives hang in the balance, and as I said last time, Alliser Thorne is not a moron. He's a pig-headed racist asshole, sure, but every action he did on this show had an internally reasonable background to it, up until he went and admitted to killing Jon and attempted to seize Castle Black for himself, in spite of how fucking stupid doing all of that is.
I did.
The only way to reconcile this is that taking a stand against the wildlings is more important to these men than their own lives, but then they go ahead and surrender as soon as the wildlings show up. I know that you want Jon to execute Alliser for some hardcore vengeance and a slight dalliance with Dark Jon, but at this point, the only logical thing for this character to do in this moment is fight to his death, in his own mind dying a martyr, protecting the order to which his life was bound. The worst part is that Castle Black was probably the most solid setting throughout Season 5, and Alliser Thorne was the most compelling, intimidating antagonist the show had outside of Winterfell. And over the course of like 15 minutes of total screen time across these 2 episodes so far, Alliser Thorne and the entire plot at the Wall have been irrevocably obliterated. For 5 seasons, on and off, we watched this rivalry brew. We saw Alice's prejudices and cynicism drive him to hatred of this boy. We saw Jon embrace more and more responsibility and become a man. And in the best episode, we saw them put everything else aside in service of protecting the institution they had both sworn their lives to.
It was a difficult decision either way, sir.
We saw them momentarily show respect to one another's capabilities. We saw Thorne struggling with maintaining loyalty to Jon Jon's office on one hand and acting on his disdain for Jon's actions on the other. And finally, we saw him take no pleasure in murdering Jon. It was well and truly for the Watch. But how does he then uphold his values and protect the Watch for which he has pledged and risked his life? In Season 6, Thorne's sudden onset of incompetence leads to a more swift downfall than is befitting for him. Jon's legacy exacting vengeance for him is a fine direction for the story, but the plot requires Alliser Thorne, a great character with a great actor behind him, to inexplicably become even stupider than the brains writing his actions. Every single thing we've seen him do has actively led to his imprisonment and eventual execution. Abandoning Jon's body, publicly admitting to killing Jon.
I did.
Not forcing this door down immediately. For some reason letting Melisandre wander around the castle without bound. Not accounting for those loyal to Jon before committing the mutiny. Moronically allowing Ed to slip out of the castle. Not pursuing Ed after moronically allowing him to slip out of the castle. Having like 10 dudes point arrows at a door he's standing in front of while having no dudes outside the castle or on the walls keeping an eye out for Ed, who you moronically allowed to slip out of the castle. Not precautioning your men that there will be a giant happening. Inspiring so little loyalty that the castle full of men you have behind you instantly surrender, apart from one kid who, you know. In summation, Alliser's downfall wasn't caused by his own flawed values or the wits and strength of the protagonists. It was caused by the plot rewriting him as a potato. He's like a plotato.
Potatoes.
And all of this could have been prevented if only he'd thought to grant himself the slightest bit of protection. So stupid. Almost as stupid as browsing the internet without using a VPN. Friends. Fellow Dragon Show intellectuals. Weird people who watch just to leave mean comments. I have a confession to make. I'm in love with NordVPN. Please, withhold your shocked gasps. It's true. I love how NordVPN keeps my ISP from seeing all of my searches on AO3. I love that NordVPN protects me from dodgy shenanigans on public Wi-Fi. I love using NordVPN's fancy UI. Oh wow, look, it's a map of the world. That's our world. I can connect to a server in, say, Australia, so I can pretend to be there and watch Rick and Morty on Netflix like some kind of genius. Oh wait, I'm already in Australia. But to all you queenless Americans, no, I don't want to watch Big Mouth! Simply conjure your internet connection to Brisbane, and there you go. One hot Netflix coming right up. Have you ever had a tunnel, but you weren't entirely happy with how unsplit it was? Well, Nord's got you covered. Split tunneling lets you choose which programs you want to go through the VPN, and I was genuinely giddy when I realized I could use that to watch shows from around the world while playing games at the same time without demolishing my ping. It's so cool. Let's be real, you probably know at this point that you should be using a VPN, but a lot of you have been putting it off for whatever reason. So let me put your mind at ease. NordVPN is quick to set up, easy to use, and cheap, especially when you go to nordvpn.com/Glidus, or just click the link in the description to make the most out of your streaming services for just the price of a coffee, or a similarly priced non-coffee item. So, you know, go do that. No, Mr. Nord, I don't want to go to Brazil! Tormund's reaction to Jon's death is the only logical one so far. Jon is dead, and neither Tormund nor anyone else has reason to think that that could be adjusted, so his matter-of-fact response to burning him along with the other dead is a breath of fresh logic. Some man tells a very manly lie about how he sexually harassed the Queen, and then Big Greg Gallagher's his head. I appreciate that Big Greg's strength is all but directly compared to 1-1 the literal giant's strength, who did his thing fewer than 3 minutes ago. This little moment where Greg fetches Cersei is good. It's a nice slow reprieve from the murder we just saw, with some storytelling on the more subtle side of things. Tommen being manipulated into keeping Cersei from her own daughter's funeral is just heartbreaking, and it makes for a fine, tense scene that also reasserts how intimidating the elevated portion of the Earth's crust is. You know, this one's not terrible either. King's Landing is actually holding up so far. Jaime manages to keep it in his pants even with a family member's corpse in the room, so good on him for making progress. Hey, I get to talk about Dean Charles Pog Champman for the first time. He's good. Apparently nobody found Obara and Nymeria, which poses a lot of problems for my brain. Wait, that's not a plot hole, they had a jetpack. Of course they got away. Anyway, I love that Jaime is doing everything he can to keep what remains of his family together.
Everything she endured, she did it for you.
Having lost Myrcella and actually acting on all his father's talk about family, this ramped up, vindictive and protective nature is a resounding success of a development for him and sets up for a fantastic exploration and breakdown of his character when his family is once and for all torn apart. Oh well. Frank shows up for some manly dick measuring, and this scene is probably the most interesting he gets throughout the show. Wielding ultimate power while maintaining his posture as a humble, fearful, fragile old man, he has such potential to be so compelling, but in retrospect he lacks a strong motive. Sure, we get the general vibe of his goals, that being restoring the power of the faith in Westeros to pre-Maegor levels, but throughout seasons 5 and 6 there are so many questions the High Sparrow raises that never get answered, most of them being, what? This is also a problem Littlefinger has for a long time, but at least he isn't so fucking boring. He does such fun things so frequently. The mystery of his goals is a lot of the allure, the riddle of what all these crazy actions are in service of. And with Littlefinger we do end up getting an answer, a payoff to years of mystery.
Me on the Iron Throne.
Boring! Whereas with Oldman McJesus Face, it's obvious that his actions are in service of giving power to his radical sect of the faith, but why? What for? If he exists as a foil for Cersei in that he would do anything for his beliefs, whereas she is self-serving to a fault,
I do things because they feel good.
why not have the story demonstrate that? Why not have him die for his beliefs instead of for... Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. I need to do a deeper dive on this guy to be sure, but currently it looks like he's a confusing mess who the writers just used to be generally antagonistic to the Lannisters in any way they need, regardless of whether or not it's sensible for the character they've established or the plot they're crafting. This scene is okay, mainly because of how strong Jaime's vengeful characterization is at this point.
You would spill blood in this holy place.
Well, the gods won't mind. They spill more blood than the rest of us combined.
But I'll never get over how cheesy it is when the cultists emerge from shadowy recesses en masse and on cue. And let's not forget that this is one of those classic season 6 scenes that, by introducing certain elements, tacitly promises future plot points that aren't ever explored. Namely, in this scene, some violent payoff to Jaime's conflict with the Sparrows and growing desperation to keep his family together, and some philosophical comeuppance for the High Sparrow. Although, as we know, if a villain's modus operandi is in the realm of thought and manipulation, obviously the best way to see them defeated is with a big explosion. Or the knife he gave your brother for some reason. You see what I did there? It's kind of like a comparison to a thing that sucks to demonstrate that this also sucks. Anyway, Tomo visits his mum, apologizes for never calling, and states that he should have made heads roll to prevent her walk of atonement, starting him down a path of strength and family loyalty that, in spite of how interesting it might be for both his character and this plot, goes nowhere. Cersei saying that gold was always Myrcella's color over red is a beautiful line where she's basically saying that Myrcella was the least Lannister-ish of them, the least like her, reflecting her remarks from the previous episode. So again, yeah, the dialogue is so much better than the final 2 seasons. There are a lot fewer continuity errors and many lines effortlessly achieve some resonant subtext, but good dialogue is not synonymous with good writing. The dialogue in this scene is fine, good even, but when you look at it in a broader context, this scene is largely inconsequential at best, baffling at worst. Tommen's briefly inflated against the High Sparrow in the next episode, and that's it. Tommen's change of heart lasts about a third of a scene. Like much of this season, King's Landing in this episode promises high, but ultimately winds up being meandering and mostly forgettable. Now come, take my hand and join me on a voyage to the next scene!
If I lost my cock, I'd drink all the time.
Another scene in Marine, another obscene routine about the pain. Green writers of screen convene and keenly glean this lesson from mean.
Ding dong.
That's enough of that. If you're not sure how to start a scene, simply reach for your largest shoehorn and try to wedge in an irrelevant dick joke. Don't worry if it feels like the scene is going to break. Just keep pushing. Here, Tyrion is cemented as downright insufferable. This character once entertained us by demonstrating great wit, applying sharp intellect in creative ways, and turning a phrase every so often. These days, though, he mostly resorts to inserting vulgar comments at his friend's expense and then making shit up when he's called out on it. I'm gonna say it. Tyrion Lannister's degradation is one of the most obvious examples of this show being dumbed in the downward direction. Instead of defending his actions with genuine wit, Tyrion will now deflect with some quick, quotable quip.
He makes dwarf jokes, I make eunuch jokes.
I do not make dwarf jokes.
You think them?
Instead of providing insight into his person and his background and the world around him and the themes at hand when he's asked about dragon lore, he'll simply declare,
I drink and I know things.
It's not so often that a writer will outline exactly how they've flanderized a character, but there it is. How kind of them. Through the first 4 seasons, maybe 5, Tyrion was deeply complex, charming, often morally grey, conflicted, hilarious, tragic, and at times burgeoning on monstrous. He was vengeful, whimsical, sympathetic, he cared for the downtrodden, he spoke out against the powerful. He was so many things, so much more than the in-world stereotype of a drunken dwarf who cracks wise for cheap laughs. But now, who is Tyrion Lannister in season 6?
I drink and I know things.
So yeah, you can sell this shell of a character, pretend he maintains any resemblance to his literary counterpart beyond his name and height. Sell your t-shirts, your mugs, your fridge magnets. Just know that the cost was the soul of one of the greatest characters of his generation of fiction.
What have you done?
Best season of Game of Thrones. Get fucked. Also,
we are searching for the men who burned the ships, but nobody saw anything.
Hello, I would like one cheeseburger, please.
Mate, aren't there 8,000 Unsullied? And none of them were stationed at the docks? Dude, Dany had 93 ships and nobody was watching them. So many people would have been required to coordinate this incident. I get that the population of Meereen probably won't be willing to help the Unsullied, but come on. No intel, no captured harpies. No one saw anything. Nothing. It's just silly. So the conversation turns to the dragons, and Tyrion states,
Dragons do not do well in captivity.
which is, yeah, that seems true, sure. But then the point of the next scene is unchaining them, but still leaving them confined under the pyramid, which is captivity. Congratulations, boys. You get to slowly go insane and wither away in the same area, but now you can go to that dimly lit corner over there instead of just looking at it. Furthermore, Tyrion ascertains that Missandei is friendly with the dragons and yet goes in to free them himself, having never met them without her, knowing that if they get the wrong vibe, he gets instantly Quentined. This man once outsmarted Littlefinger, by the way. Dragons look pretty good, eh? Tyrion shows them respect and he tells them the cute story about how he wanted the dragon as a kid. Oh. I like how Viserion's movements indicate he understands that Tyrion will unchain him. It's not a bad scene unto itself, aside from the stupidity of the plan, but I must emphasize that nowhere does it at all indicate that Tyrion be a Targaryen. Like they discussed mere minutes ago that dragons are smart and capable of peaceful interactions with humans, even non-Valyrians. Don't talk to me about Tyrion Targaryen. You leave me out of... You get out of here with that theory. Go on, get.
But I'm quite good at Mario Kart 8, so...
Back to my favorite plotline. The waif hits Arya with a stick.
Hit with stick! Hit with stick! Oh, die, you bastard.
I guess we see Arya's growing frustration through her actions, which is good as long as you can accept the plot so far, which, no. And Maisie flailing wildly at nothing is pretty funny. Man, I can't wait to find out why the waif hates Arya so much. Jaqen shows up for an identity test, like dedication to his random-ass cult, offering her shelter and food and eyesight if she breaks character. She successfully maintains that she is no one, thereby signaling to the audience that Arya values her lack of identity and devotion to the cult higher than her basic survival needs. Considering the way they treated her last season, the only explanation for this devotion is that Arya now deeply, psychologically, truly, and adverbally considers herself to be no one. So if she were to, say, suddenly chuck a metaphorical Yui in regards to that without a major psychological breakthrough and only a scant amount of stimulus, one might think that this plot is cheap, expedient, unplanned trash. Arya passes the test, so whoever this is takes her back. Okay, so at Winterfell, Bruce and Ramsay discuss last episode's shit show.
Half a dozen men.
That's weird, I only remember seeing 5 Bolton men killed. It's not the most ham-fisted way of introducing Harry and Karstark, but it's not great. He's a strange inclusion at all, because what's the point of rushing to set him up if you end up not doing anything with him anyway? Roos's incredulity at the idea of assaulting Castle Black is good. He also does my job by outlining why Alliser's mutiny is so goddamn stupid.
I did.
Ramsay says they don't need to worry about uprisings if they have the support of the Umbers, Karstarks, and Manderleys, which is such a pointless thing to bring up if you have no plan to rally their support. You lucked out with Harry and Karstark being a son bitch, and then the Umbers just kind of show up later, also lucky. But the Manderleys, who owe the Starks everything?
Generations ago, the Manderleys were driven from the Reach, but the Starks gave them their land in return for fealty.
Ramsay is talking about attacking the Watch and murdering the Lord Commander, who is a Stark bastard. The idea that House Umber and House Manderley would ever support this is legitimately insane, but nobody calls him out. Isn't Ramsay supposed to be cunning, deceitful, manipulative, tactful? Here he's just completely unhinged, which, given the desperate situation he finds himself in, could be a reasonable development, but that's not at all how they're playing this. This scene sees Ramsay spontaneously murdering his father, stepmother, and newborn half-brother, so instead of trying to package it as a cold and calculated move, why not steer into him snapping under the pressure he faces and the death of the one person he loved? Have people call him out for fucking up. Have his father lose his cool and just tear into him. Have Roose confidently declare that he has a new heir when he learns about his son. Then Ramsay fucking loses it and starts killing people. I suggest this because otherwise, Ramsay, this plot's most important character, the main antagonistic force, stops making sense.
I've always had a set of balls. You've just never seen them.
That is about the gayest thing I've ever heard.
Alternatively, if you want him to remain believably cold and calculated, don't have him kill his entire family, because that's probably the stupidest thing he could do at this moment, and only makes sense if he's completely blinded by rage. Like, what do you think Walder Frey is gonna do when he finds out his daughter, grandson, and ally were murdered? At least take hostages, right? And he doesn't even blame anyone specific. Who is gonna believe something so vague as
Poisoned by our enemies.
It's just so out of character and out of nowhere, especially since Roose literally just confirmed that Ramsay is still his heir.
You'll always be my firstborn.
And, you know, rip Roose, what a great presence on the show. Then Ramsay does the thing with the dogs. It's kind of like set up for the thing later on in episode 9, isn't that clever? Brienne tells Sansa about Arya and how she sucked at looking for her.
I saw her with a man. I don't think he hurt her.
She doesn't think it's relevant to mention that it was the fucking Hound.
Sandor Clegane, the Hound. How'd she look? Did she look good? She look good?
Then Brienne continues her streak from last episode of not admitting fault.
I should have gone with you while I had the chance. It was a difficult choice, my lady.
As though she didn't completely miss the opportunity to save her from King's Landing in Season 4, and then failed miserably at making a compelling case against Peter in Season 5, only then to abandon her rescue attempt of her later in Season 5. Now, this wouldn't be an issue if Brienne was supposed to be a smug arsehole who never saw anything wrong with herself, but we know that that's not who she is. The Brienne we know is reflective and holds herself to a higher standard than she could ever keep. She should be on her knees begging for Sansa's forgiveness. God, the more I think about it, the more I realize the extent to which Season 6 gouges its characters. Who is this person? Theon hears some horses in the distance and says they shouldn't be making fires, to which Sansa responds,
We just have to make it to Castle Black.
which is a complete non sequitur, because just one fire would be enough to give away your position and get you captured. That's fine if you think Sansa is supposed to be stupid, but I think she's supposed to be smart.
She's the smartest person I've ever...
Cheeseburger.
So don't have her say stupid things? She should be just as cautious as Theon is about being found. Theon's scared Jon will execute him, so he decides to find another plot, and as we'll see, the show makes one up for him. Alfie is so good, by the way. Theon's quest for atonement in the eyes of Jon is brilliantly set up.
I don't want to be forgiven.
And then he just fucks off the other way.
Where will you go?
Home.
Why? Why delay it by like 2 seasons? Oh, no clue how he plans on getting to Pyke or why he thinks he needs to go there. When he gets there, he says that he wants to support Yara's claim to the Iron Islands, but obviously he doesn't know that that's a thing until he gets there. So at this point, why does he want to go to Pyke, a place that has not been his home in over a decade? A place where the last time he went there, he was constantly shat on. To confront Balon, to assert himself as his heir, that'd be such a weird shift for him to suddenly desire that. See, the show does this thing where they end on a sexy attention-grabbing line and then cut away. It's usually fine because the next time you see that character, the thing they cut away from is elaborated upon, or the elaboration is implicitly baked into the scene.
What do we have?
Pig shit.
But when you don't do that, it's just like, what? Over to that plot we suddenly need for Theon to jump into. Balon and Yara, who are apparently both still characters on this show, yell at each other about their failing war. Interesting that Balon considers Yara his heir, but I guess it makes sense following his declaration that Theon isn't a man or whatever.
He's your son.
Son is not a man anymore.
It's a rushed catch-up on what these pretend Vikings have been up to the past few years, but it's decent at that. And of course, we love Gemma Whelan in this house, and Patrick Malahide is seriously underrated.
Shut your mouth on a bay, or I will make another heir who will.
Seriously, the dude appears in just 4 episodes, gets like 14 minutes of screen time across the whole show, and still manages to establish such a presence, such an efficient usage of screen time, and such a fantastic performance.
And how do you feel about that?
It's almost as though you could use this to craft an excellent endgame villain that arises naturally from the story. But guess what? They didn't! They had a perfect opportunity to roll with an intimidating villain who we already knew, and when they needed him most, they threw him off a fucking bridge and replaced him with a random guy we've never even heard of. I mentioned this briefly in the Glidus movie, but now it's time to dig into it. Euron Greyjoy was utterly fucking pointless. Consider what Euron does across the story. He seizes control of the Iron Islands, suffers no consequences for kinslaying, makes mortal enemies of Yara and Theon, allies himself with Cersei, does some stuff in her war, makes a dwarf joke, captures Yara, loses Yara, impossibly kills a dragon, then gets killed by Jaime Lannister, with whom he had a teeny tiny underdeveloped feud.
The cheeseburger.
If you replace Euron with Balon, most of these things can still happen, and the few things that can't, we can just remove.
And nothing of value was lost.
With the added bonus of much more tension between Theon, Yara, and their villain. As we see in this scene, there's already tension rising between Yara and Balon. They already wrote it in, so maybe the catalyst of Theon returning to Pyke sparks a violent family feud and kicks Balon into ramping up his ambitions. And maybe you could still have Euron around as a wacky sidekick for Balon. No, that's fucking dumb. You may think that Balon allying with Cersei flies in the face of him denying Robb Stark's request back in Season 2 town, but Balon's reasoning there had some nuance to it.
I destroy Robb Stark's enemies for him, and he will make me king of the Iron Islands once again. No man gives me a crown. I pay the iron price. I will take my crown.
But here in Season 6ville, he already has his crown.
The War of the Five Kings, they call it, but the other 4 are dead.
And they already established that Balon's a widower, so he can still seek Cersei's hand in Euron's place, if you want to do that.
We both loved our mother.
I don't know, I just thought it was a cool idea. Balon's death in the books is way more integral to the story because it kicks off so much action in the Iron Islands that isn't even approached in the show, and because Euron and Balon are such different characters. Show Euron isn't nearly as much as book Euron though, and the bitter, authoritative sternness of Malahide's Balon is a much better fit for the tone of a late-game villain than this eye-patchless weirdo. Book Euron is insane, but he's also terrifying. They had no problem merging Asher and Victarion, so why not merge Balon and Euron? I'm not completely sold on it, it's just an idea. I think it's a discussion worth having. I like Pilar, we all know this, but he's just not intimidating enough to pull off.
When men see my sails, they pray.
That line is supposed to make my skin shudder. He gets the lunacy down, but just not the terror. And come on, you gave Beric Dondarrion an eye patch, but we're not willing to break the bank to give Euron one. Of course, the whole notion of this plot existing at all rates low on the believability scale, given that no one has mentioned Ironborn presence in the North in almost 2 years. Like, so much of Season 5 was spent in the North, and not a body brought any of this up. Hey, isn't it weird that Yara invaded the North and nobody cares? We get some good old consequence-free kinslaying, hey, that's good setup. Despite Balon's clear wishes for Yara to succeed him, Euron, this is Euron by the way, Euron thinks there needs to be a proper Kingsmoot, which is weird because they haven't done that in centuries at best, fucking millennia at worst, so this is a huge deal, but he just says it like, yeah, no, of course we're gonna have a Kingsmoot. Doy. Then the resurrection and haircut of Jon Snow. For some reason, Dave asks the previous episode if there's some way to bring back the dead. This is dumb for reasons I talked about last time, but at least now we know that she's old. Mel's knowledge of resurrection is the payoff for the egregious plot departure in season 3, so it's good to see that it seems scantily relevant. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall Thoros mentioning a slow and hardly erotic sponge bath and a fashionable restyling. The idea is that R'hllor works through people, but
I'm a bit confused.
Because when Thoros resurrects Beric, he merely rushes over and says a prayer, but here Melisandre is like making a whole thing out of it. What I'm saying is that this ritual seems like a thing she already knew about because Thoros didn't do it and didn't tell her about this, so no, she didn't need to learn about resurrection by massively derailing the season 3 plot. And again, Stannis is dead. Melisandre's doubt in her faith is good, but why is she doing this if she does not yet think that Jon Snow is Azor Ahai? It's just so fucking strange that Davos and Melisandre don't at all mention the man to whom both of them swore their lives, and instead are laser focused on this guy they both met a year ago and barely talked to. After everyone gives up except for the good boy, the thing works. Jon has several holes in his lungs, but I wouldn't worry about that. Now, resurrecting Jon is a perfectly fine idea in the story. It's just that the way it's delivered is just awful in many, if not all ways. Not only does Davos, who barely knows Jon, recant his strongly established hardline anti-magic stance and completely forget the death of his king to whom he swore his life and the love he bore that king's daughter, Jon himself is resoundingly unaffected by a process which had been previously established as thoroughly life-altering to both the patient and the practitioner. We'll dwell on that a whole lot more later on though. I hope to Gurm that this event in the books is nothing at all like what happens here. Oh, and it's not a big deal, but the credits cutting to silence would have been more dramatic, I think. So yeah, that's home. It's, you know, I feel like it doesn't quite reach the lows of the Red Woman. How could it? But it also doesn't quite meet its highs. I can appreciate that moments like Jon waking up from his nap and Roose being suddenly murdered, what a twist, who could have seen that coming, are shocking and exciting in the moment, but when you give them a squiz in retrospect, it turns out that the plot holds about as much water as a sieve. Everything aside from the writing is still great, obviously, except I want to point out that so much of season 6 is so dark. And you know, compared to earlier scenes in similar or the same locations, there's no clear reason why. It seems intentional, but I cannot fathom the motive. A bunch of commenters on the last video said it was too dark to see, and I had this LUT lying around I made for previous videos, so yeah, except for a few scenes, you've mostly been looking at my subtle recolor. Here's some comparisons, because I don't know what else to put over this. I did the same thing in The Long Night too, all those years ago. Anyway, see you next week-ish for Oathbreaker. In the meantime, you can check out my streams talking about every goddamn theory in both Game of Thrones and Ice and Fire. Thanks to, firstly, NordVPN. Secondly, thank you to my highest tier patrons.
Aglahir, Lord Org, M. Glanus, HailTheOrange, Hoverarm, Ingvald, moremoths, Nurse Ratchet, Samsoom, Shrimp3r JR, Simcoe, Stage 78, STL Gooner, Waffl,
and
Ondy.
Man, that list just keeps getting bigger. Thank you so much. The support of these people is extremely important to this channel. Legends. It's the Dragon Show. That's the new theme song.